people at Bitcoin Magazine have made it clear that they're not too interested in the so-called laser-eyed toxic maxis. Like, they want to move past that and bring in new people, which, I mean, I'm always supportive of bringing new people into Bitcoin. A big thing for me was I was just surprised that all this very new stuff, like the ordinal stuff, was placed on such an equivalent footing with talk of improving privacy on Bitcoin or like scaling so more people can use it as money.
Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I speak with Brad Loewen, host of Beyond the Price, Exploring Bitcoin Adoption in East Asia. Brad and I both attended the Bitcoin Asia conference in Hong Kong recently, organised by BTC Inc., the same company behind Bitcoin Miami, Bitcoin Amsterdam, Bitcoin Magazine, along with their investment arm UTXO Management. Now, it was clear that there would be some ordinal-related discussions at the conference, which I wanted to verify for myself. However, I was not expecting the sheer degree of emphasis on these, as well as the overall VC, compliance and KYC, public mining and financial services direction of the conference. As we explore, I have come to question BTC Inc.'s motivations, their choice of sponsors and programming, and their commitment to Bitcoin as freedom and privacy tech. Now, Bitcoin is resilient and anti-fragile, but I can't help but wonder if this conference and the so-called Bitcoin Magazine are not part of a broader attack that uses the affinity of the Bitcoin brand to nullify the ongoing imperative for sound money, self-custody, decentralisation, and self-sovereignty. If you would like to support the show and my work, please consider tipping some sats to the show's wallet. Otherwise, pass this episode on to a friend who you think might enjoy it. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. But yeah, Brad, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Hell of a studio.
Oh, thank you. We've bumped into each other a few times over the last few days. We were both over in Hong Kong, ostensibly for Bitcoin Asia. I had a few other things I was doing over there, but we bumped into each other over there. We bumped into each other at the airport. But I thought I wanted to catch up with you because we both were there. We both saw what happened with the conference firsthand, and I thought it would be valuable to maybe unpack Bitcoin Asia, what happened, perhaps what it means, how we feel about it, what the future might look like. So that's, I guess, my high-level plan for our conversation. But I guess starting out, I mean, what made you want to visit the conference?
Well, so let's see. Last year I worked for CoinPost, which is a Japanese crypto news site, basically the Japanese CoinDesk. And so they sent me to a few crypto conferences, and that was my first, like, I'd been to a few meetups up to that point, but I'd never been to one of these huge crypto conferences.
And let's be clear, you were sort of moonlighting because you are a deep Bitcoiner, but you were sort of working with this crypto company.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we could go further and further back, but I looked for a Bitcoin job for about half a year, and there are very few of those in Japan. I needed an employer. I couldn't start my own thing, and there were very few full-time Bitcoin jobs on offer. So I reluctantly joined CoinPost, hoping it could be kind of like a step towards a full-time Bitcoin job. I worked there for about a year, and over the course of that, went to a few of these large-scale crypto conferences. Also helped them organize one in Tokyo. And then towards the latter part of that, I started a Bitcoin podcast under their umbrella. So as part of that, I started seeing that a lot of Bitcoin-only conferences were popping up in Asia. And I wanted to focus on Asia because I felt like there's not much coverage of the Bitcoin scene in Asia. We hear a lot, like there's a lot of Western Bitcoiners and they're very vocal online. But I felt like I didn't know much about what was going on in Asia, and I live here. So
Well, you grew up here as well.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and I totally agree. There's being Asia Pacific myself, it's sort of, there's certainly a strong American influence. There's quite a lot of a European influence, but the role of Bitcoin and its relationship to Asia is certainly very interesting.
Yeah. So I started this podcast, and I was seeing these different conferences popping up. So I tried to interview the organizers of these different conferences, but I really wanted to actually go to see what they were like. And for one thing, to see how they differed from crypto conferences. At least I hoped they would differ. Let's see, the first Bitcoin conference I went to was actually probably Cheat Code in Bedford a month or two ago, because I was traveling and I was able to go to the UK at that time. So I went, and that was really great. Small, like 500 people. Peter McCormack, host of What Bitcoin Did, he organized it. And because he has such a big platform, big podcast, he's connected with all the most, I don't want to say influential, but like some of the big voices in Bitcoin. I mean, like looking at your bookshelf, like Jeff Booth was there, Lynn Alden was there. So like these authors, these podcasters, these builders, they were there. And I think because most of the audience was listeners to the podcast, we were very aligned in what we were, like the reasons we were excited about Bitcoin and its potential to improve the world. So that was a great experience. But it was in Europe, and I wanted to know what was going on in Asia. So when I heard that Bitcoin Magazine, or I guess BTC Inc., the organizers of the big Bitcoin conference in the US, were going to do one in Asia, I definitely wanted to go, because I'd always wanted to check out the big conference in the US, but I haven't been able to make it there yet, and I probably won't be able to make it this year. So I thought, well, I definitely want to see the Asia one. So that is how I found myself in Hong Kong.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, similar, I guess, to myself, I had kind of been, I guess, well, maybe a bit different, but I was looking for an excuse to maybe just go for a little holiday, maybe go and take some photos, wander around Kowloon and parts of Hong Kong that I hadn't been to since before the Hong Kong protests and before COVID and all of that stuff. And, I'd been over 5 years, get some dim sum and, enjoy the city and catch up with some friends over there. And, why not? We'll go and catch up with this conference. And look, to be fair, I knew what I was getting into to some degree. If you're just looking at the headline speakers of the show, there was certainly a VC investment, ordinal kind of flavor to the whole direction of the conference. And I sort of put that to one side because it looked like, if you scroll down a little bit on the speakers page, there were a few interesting people that I respected, people that I followed. And I thought, okay, well, look, let's see what it's all about. And I had been to a conference last year in Japan, which was incredible. And, it was this beautiful mix of local people and people flying in, and just this really great conversations. There was really good dialogue. That was the Nostra Asia conference. Yeah. And I mean, you were there as well. Yeah. And, there was just this, this dynamism to the conversations, which I was kind of looking for, the kind of, you're in the lobby and you start talking to people, and, ideas emerge. However, I think you and I both turned up on the Thursday, I believe it was, and it certainly wasn't like that. So, I mean, let's break this down. I mean, what was it about Bitcoin Asia that was so difficult and problematic? And for me personally, it was disappointing. Like, what made it so? And can we maybe try and arrive at a bit of an understanding of like sort of maybe where the decisions were made? What decisions were made that led to that sort of outcome, perhaps?
Yeah. So walking in, like my first thought was, oh, this looks like a crypto conference. Yeah. Which I was expecting, and I guess just in terms of the format, that's not inherently a problem. Like I'm talking about things like having an exhibition area with a bunch of booths, and then having the stages with
swag.
all the merchandise and the I mean, maybe booth babes is going too far, but there's definitely...
Yeah, there were certainly beautiful Eastern European women giving out free things and trying to take photos, which actually was quite interesting because I'm always conscious that you're at a Bitcoin conference. Generally, you should ask permission if you're going to take a photo. But there were cameras like shoved under my nose every minute. There was a video being taken of the whole thing. There was no questions being asked if you wanted to have your photo taken or not.
Right. I guess they didn't even do the thing where it's like you can flip your wristband to like the other side is red or something, and that means you don't want to be photographed. I don't think there was anything.
There wasn't
like that. Yeah.
So yeah, the first impression, it was this kind of you came in, you went through the entranceway, and it was this sort of cacophony of screens, JPEGs, drifting across the screen, these NFTs. You had a huge like statue kind of character thing from some ordinals based game.
Yeah.
Everyone had the big like neon yellow orange bags that they were giving out.
Yeah, those were very popular for some reason. Yeah. There was a huge booth that said BitBoy on it, and I thought, no way, BitBoy is here. I mean, for one thing, what's his name? Ben Armstrong. Like, he got fired from the company, so he is no longer BitBoy, I guess. But I thought, no way the company is sponsoring this, or they would let them sponsor them. And it turned out it wasn't. It was a completely different thing. Where
it was like a Game Boy.
Yeah, they had a device that looked like a Game Boy, and I don't know much more than that.
It was some kind of gaming device that used ordinals, somewhere in its pipeline.
Yeah. I'm sure. I like if it was something where you could play games and earn sats, like a Thunder thing or a Zebedee thing, or like maybe you saw that video of the guy who rigged his Super Mario game, so every time you touch a coin, you get sats. If it was something like that, I would be interested, but I don't think it was at all.
Yeah, I mean, certainly my impression, and probably for a good hour or two, I actually thought that first floor of the conference was it. I didn't realize there was another second floor.
Yeah.
So I spent quite a while going around all these different booths, and I mean, just to give an indication of the kind of quality of these things. talking about quality, I mean, they were kind of well put together, but they were things like cross-chain swaps. They were things like, quote-unquote Bitcoin banks, but really just crypto banks. Very much a lot of layer 2 businesses doing this and that. And honestly, I didn't think I saw a real Bitcoin business amongst a lot of them. There were miners. There were miners, but in terms of, I guess, on the software side.
Oh, yeah.
Because the mine, I think we'll get to that in a second, but the booths were, I would have said 80-90% were just some kind of ordinal this and that layer 2 type thing, which just really, I don't know, it just felt really strange to me.
Yeah, well, this is one thing that I was curious to see, and one of the reasons I went was because I was curious if the business model that you see in crypto, if that is pursued by Bitcoin companies as well. With crypto conferences, it's pretty clear. You have all these projects. They raise a bunch of money, and then they plow a ton of that money into marketing. And a big part of that is like having these huge booths and sponsoring conferences. And the reason they do that is because they need users to pump the token, to make it seem like the community is vibrant. So I was curious, because, I mean, if you step outside of crypto, you go to other industry conferences and you see like similar things like Tokyo Game Show or like real estate conferences. It's a common format, so the business model must be effective. But I was curious, like, would you see Lightning Labs with a booth, or would you see, Thunder or Zebedee or what are some other like respectable Bitcoin companies?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, if we were talking about, say, Lightning-based businesses, I mean, what benefit would they get from having a booth? They're not exactly, in many cases, they're not selling a product, or it's some sort of open source project where they make their money some other way. And in that case, there's not necessarily a direct to consumer pathway. in which case, maybe even if the opportunity was there to be a sponsor, that's not really appropriate for them. So maybe conceding that point that, there's a space for these kind of in-person booths, that happen to be that's quite popular right now. It's become a thing, and we'll get to maybe some of that later on, just sort of the directionality of these ordinal projects. But I just felt like they didn't really, you talk to people, they didn't really understand Bitcoin. It was just, I don't know, it was like they didn't really have that much stake in it. They were giving it a go. They were throwing money at this new thing and seeing if it stuck. It was a kind of a quick money, get rich quick type vibe. And then you mentioned the miners, and for me that was a whole nother piece, because I had many people come up to me trying to shill the latest Avalon 185 terahash or this or that. You had Bitmain, you had all of the makers there, at Luxor, and people just basically trying to pick you up on the floor of the conference and say, hey, what mining pool are you with?
Yeah.
And what really stood out to me talking to the miners was they don't give a shit. They they'll build SHA-256 machines. They'll build any algo that you need to hash. Any protocol, they'll build a machine for it, and they're sort of in that hardware commodity space. And it was interesting. I spoke to some of the guys working on some immersion technology and cooling and stuff, but I don't know. It was like, it felt a lot more. It felt like I wasn't the target market.
Right.
Maybe that's another way of putting it. What do you think?
Yeah. I felt similarly, and I think Bitcoin Magazine, or at least certain people at Bitcoin Magazine, have made it clear that they're not too interested in the so-called laser-eyed toxic maxis. Like, they want to move past that and bring in new people, which, I'm always supportive of bringing new people into Bitcoin. I was surprised at the level of rejecting what in my view has been a major part of the Bitcoin community up until now. Maybe rejecting is too strong of a word, because there were sound money advocates on stage, and there were speakers that we were interested in and that we resonated with. But I guess a big thing for me was I was just surprised that all this very new stuff, like the ordinal stuff, was placed on such an equivalent footing with talk of improving privacy on Bitcoin, or scaling so more people can use it as money, and conversations like that, which I would always value the most highly. I was surprised that everything was kind of put on the same level.
Well, I went through my notes just earlier, because I made some notes sort of at the time, and kind of it's been a week and a bit, and I look back and I think, if this had been a crypto conference or a shitcoin conference of some sort, or if Bitcoin Magazine had been shilling shitcoins overtly, I think it would be a slightly different story, because it's kind of like, well, that's stupid, full stop. But I think what really bothered me about this whole thing, and I didn't expect this when I first thought about it. I thought, hey, there'll be some ordinal stuff there, but I'll be able to sort of sift through that to find the signal. I think reflecting on it now, what really bothered me about it was I want to call it the affinity scam, the use of the word Bitcoin Asia, Bitcoin Magazine, this affinity scam, which feels like it's being deployed now for a certain narrative, which I hope we can get into, that is big business. The institutions are here, and they're only interested in ETFs, KYC, compliance. They're only interested in corporate mining and, OFAC compliance and all of this stuff that traditionally Bitcoiners look at and think, no way, that's not Bitcoin. But actually, the people who were getting platformed, for the most part, were in that camp. And so the headline speakers, again, VCs, ETFs, investment compliance, basically Chinese mainland money, Hong Kong investment type people. Because let's also say, it's probably worth mentioning, I would say probably 80% of the audience, I don't know what you think, but I would have guessed 80% felt like they were either mainland Chinese or Hong Kong. I think there was maybe 20-25% that were clearly from overseas. What do you think?
Yeah, can't be certain of the percentages, but a very large contingent from China or Hong Kong.
Yeah. And so it really felt like this conference was aimed at sort of broaching that market. And so the kind of pragmatic American-centric Bitcoin narratives that you and I partake in, and that for us, that's sort of how we see Bitcoin, that those weren't really relevant to that audience. Financial censorship, compliance, I mean, these are just the way it works in totalitarian states, right? So I felt like that was really problematic, and it was like the conference was playing to that. It was like, the cynic in me says it feels like they thought they could get away with doing that because it was only going to be a handful of people who made their way to Hong Kong.
Right.
Compared to, say, Miami, or Amsterdam or whatever, wherever they have their other conferences. So it was like, we'll give it a go because we want to try and get some Bitcoin, Chinese people who want to put money into Bitcoin stuff, whatever it might be, speculatively or not. We'll try and get them in. We're not going to contentiously talk about anything. We're not going to have discussions of human rights. We're going to have, discussions of cross-border capital, sending and receiving, stuff like that, which is very gray zone for these institutions, right?
Yeah. I interviewed John Riggins, one of the organizers and one of the staff at Bitcoin Magazine. I interviewed him on my podcast a few months ago, and he was talking about how welcoming Hong Kong was. Like someone else said, I'm not sure if this is true. Someone else said that they got the venue for free.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know that.
I don't know if that's true, but I think according to him, Hong Kong government was
free.
Very,
so they knew somebody who knew somebody type arrangement.
Possibly, yeah. But yeah, it sounded like Hong Kong was very welcoming, which surprised me because, the Bitcoin themes that I tend to think of first when I think of Bitcoin are not things that would really please the Chinese government. But yeah, after going, it was kind of like, oh, I see. We're gonna shy away from most of those topics for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part. And we're gonna talk a lot about the recent ETF decision, and we're gonna have a lot of NFTs on Bitcoin type people.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I absolutely agree that, it was about the ETF, the ordinals, the halving, and when we talk about ETF, obviously the Hong Kong Bitcoin ETF, which had just come out a couple of days prior to the conference. We're going to talk about Taproot Wizards, we're going to talk about this and that, and it was this kind of neutered, non-adversarial kind of conversation, and the adversaries that were placed in the conference were the ones who were sort of looking at say ordinals and saying, well, look, you can't stop us from using Bitcoin like this. That was, I think, about the extent of the pushback, and there was something also quite insidious about that. I think just the optics of it. I mean, I understand that this is sort of the mode of operation for these wizards, as they call themselves, but there's just something inherently debauch about it, and it just feels like it's not an organic project. It's an attack, it feels, and Bitcoin can withstand attacks, as you know, but and I think many people maybe would say, well, it doesn't matter in that case, but what I'm trying to get at is, I come back to the block size war, and I've got the book right there, with the cover is Hong Kong, and it felt like there's some synergy there with what happened with the block size war, and what is happening now, which is the control of narrative. Because I think there's a certain engineering mindset that says, well, if the economic nodes make the decisions, the users make the decisions, it doesn't matter what big business says. But we are moving into a world now where, how many people are actually running their own node? How many people are actually competently following technical conversations around what is happening.
Yeah.
And then how many people are YOLOing into this stuff? How many people are corporately bound? And then how much of the media platforms are captured? Because I think there's something to be said about how close it was cut with the block size wars, which was before my time, but reading Jonathan's book about that time, it seems like, man, if the big blockers had the Bitcoin subreddit and maybe one other key point of communication, they could have actually probably won. It was only maybe from a few people who really stood up and fought back and took control of those things that the soft fork consensus was maintained.
Yeah.
But now that you've got the thing that literally calls itself Bitcoin Magazine talking about this stuff, and the Bitcoin Asia conference talking about this stuff, platforming certain ideas around compliance and KYC and institutions, I don't know, it feels coordinated, and it's like there's a narrative shaping taking place.
Yeah, I think the idea that Bitcoin is inevitable is dangerous.
Dangerous.
It probably is inevitable in some form, but I'm not totally convinced that form is going to be the best form for everyone. I mean, all of human history has been about people doing their best to get the best deal for themselves, even if that means the worst deal for other people, and trying to gain power. So I think we shouldn't be surprised when cycle after cycle, group after group comes in trying to subvert Bitcoin to their own ends. And I think it is very resilient against that. And it kind of plays on that, where the more people try to take power, the more they strengthen Bitcoin up to an extent. But I don't think we should take that for granted. And we should, Bitcoin is just a tool which can be used for many different things. And I think I recently read a quote by Hal Finney way back saying that we need to spread the idea of freedom and privacy. And that, just because we spread Bitcoin doesn't necessarily mean that we spread those ideas. Like, Bitcoin could be used in many different forms, and if we're not careful, maybe it could end up just being fully KYC'd, fully custodied by institutions, and that would probably not change very much about the way the world functions and the lack of freedom that people have. So that would be a real shame. I think we should be careful about those ideas. But I will say one thing that stuck out to me was Casey Rodamore himself, where everything I've listened to him on, whether it was on stage at Bitcoin Asia or on podcasts, he really, I mean, I don't want to say is a true Bitcoiner, but he talks about self-custody. I really get the sense that he strongly believes in that. Self-custody, Bitcoin is the hardest money, the best money. And I can't remember if you were with me when we were watching him on stage, and he said, come for the shitcoin casino, stay for the hard money. And I do think, most of us came to Bitcoin through crypto. So I do think there is something to that, where people, most people, myself included, don't come in for these noble, high-minded reasons. We come to make money, and then eventually along the way, the more we learn about Bitcoin, the more we get into these other things. So I don't want to write that off. I think there is value to just getting the idea of Bitcoin and ideally getting actual Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible, even if they don't necessarily understand it or believe the same things about it that we do, at least initially. So this, I guess you could call it this argument of NFTs on Bitcoin as a Trojan horse, or the shitcoin casino as a Trojan horse. I can't entirely dismiss it, but I do share a lot of the same concerns as you about where the narrative is going.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, Dan Held was also there, and surprisingly, he talked a lot about how the ordinal stuff really is this pathway to speculation and then to adoption. And it's hard. I really had to think about this actually on the flight back. It's a bit like language, how does English become English? How, these protocols, how do they form? There's not necessarily a logic to it. How did the great vowel shift happen? Why do we use, these kinds of characters? There's I think a thesis can be applied, but it doesn't necessarily have any kind of logic. It's because it's a human construction, and it's not an engineered thing. And I think maybe the problem here is that really there's two things at play. There's the engineered solution, which is Bitcoin and the software and the things that work in a certain way. And then there's the human layer. And it's the human layer which gives it value, but it's the human layer that's also the one that's able to be most easily corrupted by these classic techniques. And it just seemed to me that the way that Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin conferences are being used as these platforms for promoting ideas that eventually could become engineered solutions. So what I mean is, we can talk about ordinals all day long, but at the end of the day, they fill up my node, and I don't really like them, but they're not an existential threat to Bitcoin. But when we start talking about soft forks, or we start talking about code changes, we start talking about drive chains, things that are actually engineering changes that are really hard to go back from. You start manufacturing consent for those, and then the change happens, and then it's like, oh shit, we broke the thing. And I think that's maybe where my concern lies a little bit more. And so an example of that is you had Paul Stork there talking about drive chains on a panel. And for me, it felt like a very uncontested conversation. I think the moderators sort of pushed back a little bit. I can't quite remember who the moderator was, but it was like, it didn't feel like it was a debate. It was sort of like, Paul, tell us about drive chains and how great they are. And I don't really have a technical opinion on it, but all I think is, man, I'm not, the soft forks that are going to come, they need to be, highly vetted, much more than before. And to give a platform and just technically to have it uncontested in a panel format, for me that just felt really disingenuous. Conversations around OpCat and covenants, that also was like, yeah, it's coming. And I've got a quote here. Someone said, the developers and the Bitcoin miners will decide OpCat. And I think you were there when the person said that as well. You remember that?
I remember that, yeah.
And I just thought, man, I just had a flashback to, it's just an easy change. We'll just increase the block size. It's like, no. And even if OpCat is the thing that it needs to be, which I don't know if it is, the fact that it's just talked about so frankly, oh yeah, it's going to happen. It's easy peasy. Just roll out a soft fork and we'll do it.
Yeah.
I think that's where I'm starting to feel the danger.
It was hard with OpCat. I don't have a technical knowledge of it, but people, I thought that it was like a pretty niche proposal and not much backing for it. So I was surprised at the conference how many of the speakers were either outright supportive of it or thought that it would pass. It would be adopted, but I couldn't tell if that was kind of like when you have one of these, like in an election, in a political race, you have a candidate who has no chance of getting elected, but they still have to talk as if we've done the math, like we just need to win this one community in this one state, and then everything will ripple out from there. And you almost believe them because they talk so confidently, and you're like, well, he's a smart guy, and if he's confident, then there must be a chance. It was hard for me to tell if it was kind of that, where the confidence is just marketing, or if they actually thought, no, this has a real chance.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure Elizabeth Stark from Lightning Labs was also like, amongst a million words a minute, OpCat, and there were others, and it just felt to me like, again, so I don't have a technical opinion on it, but what I do have is an understanding, having spoken with, very technical people, as you know, looking at simplicity, other ways of approaching this. Is the concept even of covenants something that should be looked at as a BIP? Because when do the BIPs end? Are we going to have another one in 5 years, another one in 10 years? Is this the way to do it? That's where my concern lies. I think the actual technicalities of whether, because it used to be in Bitcoin, and then they took it out, Satoshi, I think, way back in the day.
Yeah.
And so arguably it's like, we'll just turn it back on. But I think the philosophy of how do you even look at changes now, given the issues with ordinals and the SegWit discount and all of this stuff, which took many years to kind of manifest. I just don't know if we can look at it purely from that, simple-minded engineering perspective, and any sense of urgency, I think, is a bit of a red flag for me.
Oh, yeah.
Like, maybe we'll talk about this in a decade, but that then connects back to some of the privacy issues, because are there soft forks, are there sort of so-called base layer changes that need to happen from a privacy perspective? What are they? It's all very confusing, maybe perhaps on purpose.
Yeah. It is confusing and hard to follow, and I do think we probably will, always have BIPs, always have Bitcoin improvement proposals, but I would think that the rate at which they're implemented will slow down. Like in the very early days, it was pretty speedy. You would have at the very beginning, Satoshi implemented stuff without any discussion. I mean, he was kind of the only guy around, and then after that, probably a bit of discussion. But as it grows, I think the speed of these things slows down. So maybe that explains some of the urgency. People feel like the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be. So we want these changes. We need to push them through now. But I agree that the urgency is kind of a red flag.
Yeah, well, it's also a perversion of the conversation process, and this, I think, is something maybe has its lineage with block size war, but it's sort of like, how do you get people to talk constructively in a kind of scientific engineering type way about things when there's this kind of underlying tribalism and kind of trollism and all of these things, which mean that you can kind of boil something down to a meme, or you can hand wave it away without really getting into the technical details. And I think that's also concerning, that I haven't really seen technical conversations, and maybe not necessarily conversations. I guess they're more like responses to proposals and things like that. They're more written documents, engineering type things. But even analyses of those technical documents, it's not something I've seen that's been talked about in the Bitcoin community, certainly not at this conference. It's almost like a keyword, opcat. Everyone loves cats, and so they're going to love opcat. And it's almost ridiculous. This is a lot at stake.
One thing I wanted to pick up on, which is tangentially related, you were talking about how certain speakers were saying things that you felt should be controversial, and yet there wasn't much pushback. I think that makes me think of the dynamics of how you organize a conference like that. Like, do you have a lot of individual speakers doing presentations, or do you have a lot of fireside conversations one-on-one, or do you have a lot of panels? And I was talking, when I was in Bedford at Cheat Code, I was talking with one of the organizers of BTC Prague, and he was saying that he really doesn't like panels. He thinks that they don't provide much value, and he much prefers solo presentations because people can prepare for them in advance, really nail down the message that they want to convey to the audience. Whereas with a panel, if you have really good speakers, then they will convey things of value, but it's also very easy to just ad lib, because if it's like a 30-minute panel and you have 4 people, that's less than 10 minutes of talk time per person, and especially if the moderator has them all introduce themselves at the start, then you have 20 minutes remaining, so it's 5 minutes per person, and you can definitely vamp for 5 minutes and not really say anything worthwhile. So I think so what I realized from that is that large panels are probably more a result of organizers wanting to have as many speakers as possible on the speaker lineup and make the conference look more appealing. We have all these speakers, you might not be into all of them, but you can definitely find 1 or 2 people that you're into, so you should come. It just contributes to this hyping up the conference, and it's just more marketing.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of hype, so again, coming back to the aesthetics, and as a creative person, I felt offended, physically ill from the huge red LED screen. Sorry, I mean, you remember.
Yeah.
My eyes are still recovering from the bless her soul, but whoever the MC lady was who just sort of came out, strutted out, hey, Hong Kong, I hope you're having a great day, just trying to hype the crowd like we're in a music festival or something. And
that was sorry. Go ahead.
And there's sort of just hype techniques and even just the audio of the audio quality of the mics and stuff. It's like, honestly, man, I was making notes, but I don't think I really could hear or really take away anything from the conversations that were profound. Like, they were just kind of talking at each other, and again, autistically, a million words a minute, just cramming it in. Especially for the people who had companies. Like, I'm looking at the miners and thinking, man, they're just trying to say the thing that's going to make their company look good. There's no nuance, there's no room for pause or contemplation, or actually, for that matter, audience questions. It was just like, we'll roll these guys out, we'll let them say their thing, and then we'll move on to the next group. You know what I mean? Yeah.
On the MC point, I also thought that was really interesting because as a presenter, she was very good, like polished, enthusiastic, professional. Yeah. When she had to fill time while they were scrambling to work out some problems, she was able to do that. But like, I looked at her Twitter profile, and in the first sentence are the words crypto and Dubai, which is certainly a red flag to me. And the impression I got was, like, she was saying Bitcoin, well, most of the time. Sometimes she was saying like Bitcoin or blockchain or I can't remember if she actually said crypto, but you could tell that, like, she mainly does crypto conferences, and like, she is a good presenter, but she's not a Bitcoiner. And I don't think she even had that large of a social media following. So not to say that she was bad, but I just, like, on the topic of questioning the organizers' decisions, it was like, why wouldn't you use someone like well-known in the space, or like someone that everyone, like, they know them, they've been in Bitcoin for a long time, they have credibility. Like, I mean, this is Bitcoin Magazine, they have access to anyone. Why not use someone like that rather than a crypto person from Dubai?
It's just, again, and maybe this is my sentiment again, and with what I try to do with my show and my engagement with Bitcoin, but I'm like, man, you got to slow it down. I don't need the smoke and mirrors. Like, literally, after every talk, there was like the flashing lights that like went, like we're in a music festival, and it was like Men in Black, where they're like, blanking your brain with the flash of light, and it was like, just the whole format of it. It was professional, but it was also tacky. And I think that was really what stood out to me, because if I contrast that with my other experiences with small meetups and events in New Zealand, here in Japan, and I'm like, man, I'm pretty sure like every meetup event that I've been to in New Zealand, I mean, those were higher signal than Bitcoin Asia. And the meetups we have here in Japan as well, there's genuine conversation, there's developers, there's people who are working on this stuff deeply, and it felt very superficial. And I think the cognitive dissonance and the reason it made me feel uncomfortable was because if it was a shitcoin conference, it'd be like, oh, well, it's just shitcoiners and they're noobs and they'll work it out. But it was like they were saying they're Bitcoiners, and they had the Bitcoin logos, and they were like bringing in what I think are some respectable names, and arguably there might be some politics there, but Bitcoin Magazine has access to some high quality influential people. And I certainly had someone say to me, I thought the conference was great, and that was a person who I really respected and is part of a hardcore Bitcoin cohort. And maybe they just didn't see what I saw, what you and I saw, but it's like there's again that affinity where they're talking about Bitcoin, but they're not Bitcoiners. And there's just something uncomfortable about that. I mean, for me, I guess at a high level, all it's done is say to me, look, I think there's room in the market for others to step up. Unfortunately, the brand is confusing. It's a bit like Bitcoin.com,
right?
Which, if people don't know, it's owned by the big blockers, the Bitcoin Cash people, and it's kind of like, I think it talks about Bitcoin a little bit, and they have their wallet and stuff, but it's a shitcoin.
It's a crypto wallet.
It's a crypto wallet. And so in the same vein, Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin conferences, BTC Inc. Are they LARPing as Bitcoiners, and is that dangerous for people who because if this was your first conference and you didn't know anything, are you going to be going and getting a self-custodial wallet and running a node, or are you going to be going and getting a Rune Explorer and getting into ordinals?
Yeah. That's a great point. When people come into Bitcoin, like they're always gonna go for some other stuff as well, like off the bat. I think it's extremely rare that someone would come in, they're like, yep, I understand Bitcoin, it's freedom money, I'm only interested in Bitcoin. Hopefully in the future we can grow to a size and have the right messaging where more people would come for that. But I think right now, and certainly up until now, everyone who's come in has been like, oh yeah, Bitcoin, and also, oh, let me check out Ethereum and Solana and all these others. But that is going to happen. But I would blame that on exchanges, for instance, because they're just listing all these currencies and they're not really presenting them as different. So I would blame a few different parties for that. But I would hate to have to include Bitcoin Magazine in that group of like parties that are sort of helping Bitcoin adoption, but also like throwing up a lot of distractions and a lot of trash at the same time, because they are very vocal about how they're Bitcoin only.
The Bitcoin in a multi-chain world was the title of one of the talks they had at their show.
Yeah.
So are they really Bitcoin only?
Yeah. And I mean, historically they haven't been. I think, like, even though they've always been called Bitcoin Magazine.
I mean, I can call myself anything, but do people believe it or not?
Yeah. I mean, in their defense, their coverage, like their articles in the last few years, has been like they haven't covered other cryptocurrencies like they used to. I mean, I found an article from 2017 when they were like an article on Bitcoin Magazine was promoting this new ICO token, and who was invested in the token? UTXO Management, David Bailey, like the Bitcoin Magazine people. So that was shady, and they do have that in their background. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that there's still, even though it's more like Bitcoin in name now, there's still a lot of shitcoinery going on.
Yeah. Well, along those lines as well, I think you talk about UTXO Management. So there's kind of a number of these related companies. So the BTC Inc. and then the magazine and the conferences, they're all basically the same people.
Yeah.
I think there may be some editorial directionality that's set for the magazine itself, because, I mean, certainly there is good writing that takes place there. But overall, the strategic direction it's heading in, it feels, problematic. It feels like they're in it for whatever's going to make them money. And I saw an article just today that they're no longer doing Lightning on their mobile app, Lightning payments.
Carrot on the Carrot app?
No, the Bitcoin Magazine app.
Oh.
That you used to be able to like get Bitcoin for reading articles and commenting.
Yeah. Oh, I think that used to be called Carrot. Then maybe they rebranded it to just the Bitcoin Magazine app. But
look, the other big piece that I wanted to talk to is, for me, having read historically about the role of miners and just how much how difficult they can be to work with, and how you really can't trust them to do anything. Have the amount of miners and effectively Chinese manufacturers and mining pools that had a platform at the conference was concerning to me. You had all the big ones, Foundry, Marathon, Digital, these guys, and then you had the manufacturers. You had Bitmain, some of the other pools, Luxor, and that, and it just felt to me like there was, I don't have the numbers here, but there was at least like 3 or 4 talks, and you and I saw back-to-back talks of the role of Bitcoin mining and just sort of what it means. And I couldn't help but thinking, man, I really don't trust these guys to do anything except just hash the shit that the individual miners go and send it their way. In terms of the pools and with the mining machines, it's like, look, you just make the machines, don't sabotage the machines, and I'll buy them. You're a commodity person. In fact, you don't have anything to do with Bitcoin. You're just a hardware manufacturer. And yet they were given these huge platforms. And the way, Foundry was talking about how they're totally fine with ordinals, so they can't say no to money, stuff like that. And I was like, man, that's captured. You had, the manufacturers with their new hardware that they were, announcing. I think Avalon had a new machine coming out at the conference, and as I said earlier, they'll hash anything for anyone. And so the fact that the idea that they have some sort of political power in Bitcoin is really problematic. And that was coming back to what Paul Stork was talking about, how, miners and the incentives are important. Miners are going to have all this power, blah, blah, blah. And it just, I don't know how to fully unpack just that cacophony of shit, but it just felt like a disproportionate representation of someone who basically their job is just to do this one thing. You don't have any other say in Bitcoin,
It's hard to build a movement with just individuals. At a certain point, the temptation is so great to reach out to companies. Like, rather than trying to rally 100 individual people, let's just partner with this huge company. I mean, maybe they can, like, they have a huge marketing platform or a huge marketing budget. It's kind of a shortcut. Like, we want to reach people, we want to make money. And it's a very Japanese thing to do as well. Like, let's just work with the largest companies in the space.
But even then, there was literally a mining panel there. I mean, we were there, right? And I was like, man, there's no one from Ocean. I don't think any of the Brains guys were there. I may be wrong about that, but it was like the big manufacturers, the big public pools, and that was it. There was no one from looking at BitX or any of these, indie projects. It was like, corporate mining is it. And if you want to buy some miners here, you can go here and get them, and it was like, I don't think that's how it was designed to work. And this is one of the questions as well, because you've got this whole movement now around miner extractable value and, how you can get all these extra fees as a miner that you don't have to pass on to your actual customers who are doing the work. I'm talking about miners again, talking about mining pools. And it just, that's a whole other issue, is the decentralization of the mining side of things. But it was like, it was a priori assumed that that's no longer relevant. And it's like, of course, everyone's going to be working with Luxor, Foundry, Marathon, etc.
Yeah.
And Pool. And the idea that you could just run your own machine and you could use Stratum V2 and you could do this, you could do that. Like, none of that seemed to figure into the conversation.
Yeah.
Which is, that's a whole other area of attack. But I don't know. What did you think about that?
It's hard to say no to those huge sponsors. I mean, they're the ones that can, they can bankroll your conference. So if you're going to throw a conference,
your free venue.
free venue. They can pay for all kinds of stuff. And so we see this centralizing effect where the companies that have a lot of money are able to spend a lot on marketing and conferences, and then they get speakers probably as a result of sponsoring. So then they can get their message out further and more people come on board. I think it seems like the trend is always towards centralization, whether it's Bitcoin or anything else. The trend is always towards fewer and fewer people or entities grabbing more and more power. And that's what excites me about Bitcoin, is that it seems to be so cleverly engineered to resist that. But that's just human nature. To the centralization is ultimately just a result of human nature. So I think we are going to see that come into Bitcoin. We've seen it up until now, and we'll continue to see it. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised that a big Bitcoin conference would feature the biggest companies in the space. But I think it's like kind of negative signal. I think I want to find the people who are actively trying to do things the hard way, like lift up the individual or the small miners, the new contenders, the ones who are trying to decentralize things, rather than just being like, this is the biggest company in the space, and isn't that a wonderful thing?
Yeah. Well, I think we've touched on quite a few things today, Brad, and I appreciate it. It's I was actually beginning to doubt my own sanity as I was going through, and I'm glad I took notes, because it was sort of like just the way the gut feeling I got again, aesthetically, just from the whole thing, I was like, oh, this is just shit, right? But actually trying to justify why there was something wrong, that felt wrong, being able to talk to you about it's really, really good. And I guess sort of summing it up a little bit for me, I think certainly I wanted to go and see. I needed to verify, not trust. I think there's a lot of people in the cheap seats who might say, well, what did you expect? But I think actually until you really go and you see and I think you understand the dynamics like you and I did by going and seeing ourselves, you'll never really know, right? But now I can confidently say, there's something there that's disingenuous. It's not really true to the ethos of Bitcoin, despite the name, and it certainly promotes me to think about what this might mean in terms of the security of Bitcoin, because it took people to really stand up and fight during the block size war.
Yeah.
Honestly, people I respect, I had to really put their neck out there and travel to these, for the Hong Kong agreement, the New York agreement. They had to go out there and do the work, countless sleepless nights trying to make sure this thing didn't fall over. And if those people had been psyoped into just being humble and sitting down and not doing anything, then we might have, Bitcoin may have already failed, and we'd be sitting here thinking, shit, how did it go so wrong? And it feels like maybe we're entering into that, but hyped up, 100x. The stakes are so much higher. Who knows what's going to happen when the Hong Kong ETF, these financial dudes, the mainland Chinese money starts thinking, okay, all right, guys, time to change Bitcoin like this. And it's not going to be a direct thing. It's going to be very much sort of fluffy and kind of asymmetric on the outside, and then one day we're like, oh shit, I can't even use my self-custodial Lightning wallet. Oh wait, actually we already can't. They've taken them off the App Store in the US.
Yeah.
It feels like there's connections there that I'm concerned about. I'm not losing sleep over it, or maybe I am, but I think there's work to be done, and maybe this is just this talk today is kind of us sharing that, perhaps.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that even if it's an uncomfortable experience, and even if you encounter a lot that you disagree with, I think there is value to actually going to conferences or going to events in general where you can meet people face to face. And my biggest takeaway, every time I go to any conference, my biggest takeaway is they're just people. Like when your main engagement with a topic is through Twitter or through listening to podcasts or watching YouTube, it can feel like there are these big entities, these big companies that they're so powerful and impenetrable. But you go to these conferences and you realize it's just people. Like, yeah, they have done amazing things, but other people can do other amazing things. Like it's both a pro and a con, because on the one hand, individuals, motivated, hardworking individuals can have a damaging effect if they're motivated by short-term thinking and profit motive. But by the same coin, hardworking, motivated people who are long-term thinkers and care about decentralization can also have a huge impact.
Yeah.
So I'm always encouraged by that, even regardless of what I see at a conference.
Yeah. No, it's certainly taken me a couple of days to really recover from it, but I still have faith in a sense that there is a silent majority of Bitcoiners out there, and in particular, shout out to the New Zealand crowd who I think back and I'm like, yeah, that's for me, that's like the bar that I set for what the way Bitcoiners look at the world, the relationship to the state and large corporations. And I mean, we just happen to be in this city of hyper-commerce and kind of late-stage capitalism called Hong Kong. And in a way, it's an impossible city. It's sort of, it was this historical artifact of, trade relations with China and the West. And it's just a melting pot of kind of different ideas and things. And it just sort of it makes sense that it would be so scummy in such a city. Not that the city itself is like that, but it lends itself to being a quick money, a financial type place. And I have hope actually that off the back of this, and I know there's others out there who are thinking like this, that maybe we see more actual Bitcoin conferences, because I know there's one coming up in Tokyo later this year.
Yeah, September.
Yeah, September. There's one over in Thailand as well, which I know there's a real tight crew over there.
Also September.
Yes. And, you're talking about Asia, but there's also a real awesome scene in Vietnam and other parts of Asia. And it just seems like, okay, maybe the flagship Bitcoin magazine, Bitcoin conferences, maybe they're not so hot, but is there room for others to emerge? At the end of the day, it's just a conference that, you got to go home and still do the work. Talk is cheap, but it is, I still think it is challenging when the talk is used to try and affect change that isn't good for Bitcoin. So we could probably look at maybe wrapping it up there, man. But
yeah,
I am keen to just maybe get you to share your podcast, what you're working on, just for the audience.
Yeah. Thanks for that. My podcast is called Beyond the Price, because probably like many Bitcoiners, I got tired of every time I bring up Bitcoin to someone who is not into it, or even if they are, in some cases, they're like, "Oh yeah, how's Bitcoin doing?" And that they're talking about the price. Like they're asking, is it going up?
Is it under attack by the state? No. How's it doing?
Exactly. Yeah. So I just got tired of trying to explain that it's so much more than a number. So that's what I try to do on the podcast. I try to highlight stories in East Asia where people or even companies are using it to secure themselves, secure their freedom, have a better life. Not, I guess the investment angle is part of that, but really, more than that, adopting it, actually using it. That's what I try to focus on in the podcast. That's about all I have going on right now. I wanted to help out with the September conference, but I also had to get a full-time job, so we'll see how much of that is feasible.
Yeah, cool.
But really appreciate you having me on.
Sweet. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Allingham, and that was the transformation of value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.